We're excited to have you here, Dave. And we know that branding is all about you. We're about to kickstart this session with Dave today. And when we thought about our main presenter that we wanted to have for branding, of course, we got to Dave because you made it such a, like, I think that's your legacy. And I think that's very much representing you. So thanks for being here with us today. And we got to learn from Dave how to go about branding, how to really come up with a strategy, because Dave, of course, has this figured out already. So it's if it's going to help, I'm pretty sure, and we're pretty sure that it's going to help a lot of you here and a lot of people that will be watching the recording as they embark in this new journey in the Salesforce Ohana. So how to best approach branding, Dave? What is branding? How are you defining, and why would we need one?
Yeah, first, thanks very much for inviting me here to speak about branding. I appreciate it. It's great to be back here. My first exposure to branding was with Boston Salesforce Saturday, as I mentioned, in August of 2018. And so it's awesome to be able to come back and talk about it. So to answer your question, and I've done a lot of thinking about branding over the years as I've evolved my idea of what it is and progressed through my Salesforce journey. There's a lot of different nuanced definitions for what a personal brand is, for what branding is, and how to go about it. And so I think, and this definition that I've kind of put together has changed over the years. I would qualify branding as a public persona or an identity that you create, which summarizes your unique, distinctive blend of personal and professional characteristics, your expertise, your experiences, your character, and your values that resonate within your given industry. So you can think of it like your professional narrative or your story. And then, when you take personal branding, the act of executing your brand, it's how do you package and market that brand to showcase your value to an industry, to a professional community, to a company, maybe to an employer, et cetera. And so I've used this definition, this analogy before. But if you put it another way, in the job marketplace, it's helpful to think of yourself as a marketable commodity, right? That's essentially what you are. So when you're looking for a job, you are marketing your products, which are your soft and hard skills, to prospective customers, which are employers. And to do this effectively, you need to create this vibrant personal brand that communicates your value. That's your value proposition. And then you also need a strategy for marketing that personal brand to achieve your employment goals, right? So it's not enough to have a great product. People also have to know that you have this product.
It's not a one and done exercise, right? As you said, you have to iterate. It's like you learn a lot in the process, and then whatever definition you came up as you first thought about it might not, or most likely won't be the one that you will like come up with once it evolves in the process of thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get into it in the later questions about how does your brand evolve and how do you create a brand. Before today's session, I really sat down with myself for the whole week, and I took over 10 pages of notes, just trying to analyze, because my perception of branding is always changing based upon the level of experience that I have, and branding is going to be different for each one of you. It's very unique to you and your career and your values. So it's something that when you have the time, you really have to sit down and think about it. And I've got a process for kind of how to go about doing that to create your own brand, which we'll get into. But I want to touch on your second question, and which was, why do we need a brand? And so, I think these days, most people have heard about branding. They understand that it plays a role in getting hired, but they may not know how to go about doing it, and they may not understand why a brand matters. So think about it this way. In the old way of doing things, you would apply for maybe 100 jobs, right? You'd get maybe 10 interviews with maybe 1 to 2 job offers. And some folks still do that to this day, which is kind of unfortunate if you think about it, because it takes a lot of time and it's exhausting. In the new way of doing things, you craft a professional brand, you conduct a targeted engagement with your chosen companies, and you have recruiters contact you to interview, not the other way around. And then it becomes a question of deciding between competing offers. And so, if you're thinking to yourself, that sounds kind of far-fetched, it's really not. That's exactly the approach that I took, and that's exactly what happened to me when I got hired out of the military in 2019, I didn't apply for any jobs. I had several companies approach me because of my branding campaign, and they said, "Hey, would you like to, to interview?" And then it was basically talking back and forth with them as the offers came in and choosing the best offer. And so kind of a fun story, kind of a fun side story is between the two companies that I was deciding with, the winning company was the one that offered me the opportunity to go to Dreamforce. All expenses paid in the guise of my company role, right? But for that company, typically the technical folks didn't go to Dreamforce. It was the sales folks, but I got to go because that was in my contract, because I had negotiated that as kind of the tiebreaker between these two amazing roles that I was interested in. If you're looking for a plan for targeted engagement, like how do you engage with employers? Right, we could talk for a whole separate session about that. I would just say get on Amazon and look for this book. It's called The 2-Hour Job Search, and if you're in the military, you may have heard of it already or read it. But it is a structured approach for, once you have a brand, creating relationships with targeted companies to skip ahead of all this, applying for all these jobs nonsense, and really dive down into what really matters, which is creating a relationship with that company so that they're interested in coming to you. It's written by Steve Dalton. It's a very thin book. And spoiler alert, it will take you more than 2 hours to do the job search, but it's not much more than that. It does work, and it's great if you're a process-oriented person.
I heard about it from other people too, so it might be an opportunity for me to go get it. Thanks for sharing that. Where and how do you start with branding? It might be a little bit, or it is a lot intimidating, because people think, oh, it's a process, so I really need to spend time thinking about it. I need to allocate time to really invest in doing this exercise. Is it really that intimidating, and where would you start?
Yeah, I mean, and those are good questions. I mean, if you think about it, what is a brand really? What does it look like? How do you take this ephemeral concept that we're discussing and actually bring it to life, right? And so I would say, as far as where do you start and how do you start, each one of you has a brand, whether you know it or not, and whether or not you've ever shared it with anybody else. The key is to express it by conducting an honest assessment of yourself, which will lend clarity and voice to that brand, right? So look at what you've done, what you want to do, what you're passionate about, what you're really good at, and develop what's known as a branding statement that summarizes your values and your value. And those are two separate things. So your values are what matter to you in a professional context, and your value is what, is why you matter to others in that industry that may be interested in hiring you. Right, it's your professional value. So I'll give you an example. This has not always been my branding statement. It's recently been revamped, which I would encourage everyone. You always have to keep rebranding yourself as you progress. But my branding statement is simply, I give back to the Trailblazer community by helping aspiring Salesforce professionals navigate the complicated Salesforce ecosystem and increase their chances of getting hired by helping them to build a network, create a professional brand, and explore different roles. All right, so that communicates, what I value. I value giving back, and it also communicates my value or why I should matter to others in the industry, because I have knowledge in each one of those areas, and I am community oriented, right? And so this statement guides my branding strategy, which helps me to choose the activities that I engage in and informs the content that I create. So if you're looking for, a guide on how to build your branding statement, I'll do a quick plug for Nick Charles. If you've never heard of Nick Charles, he is an enablement manager at Frost Bank. He's a military trailblazer, does quite a bit of giving back. And I'm going to post a link in the chat. He was a guest speaker on my office hours, which I host once a week, and I recorded it. And in this, let me just give this a quick copy here, and I'll paste it in that. In this super short video, he explains how to create your own branding statement. And if you want to watch the whole interview on branding, we go back and forth for an hour. That's also on the YouTube channel. So you have your branding statement, right? And now you need to create this branding strategy, which is going to inform the where, the when, and the how you convey your branding statement to your target audience. So for that, that's where your marketing channels come in, right? Your marketing channels are the vehicles for delivering your branding statement. And there's several different types. You've got, face-to-face, right? Which is career fairs, coffee meetups, trade shows and conferences like World Tour, Trailblazer DX, Dreamforce, Dream events like we talked about earlier, things of that nature. That's face-to-face, actually in person with somebody else. Then you have your virtual meetups, right? This is a great example of that. Other examples, user groups, professional community social hours, things of that nature. And then perhaps the most powerful, the most effective, and in my opinion, the most efficient, and what we're going to talk the majority about today is social media. And so with that in mind, you don't have time to market yourself on every single channel. It's just not feasible, right? You've got to eat, you've got to sleep, you've got to spend time with your family, right? Do whatever it is you like to do in your free time. So you have to be smart in choosing the channels that are going to be most impactful for you. Now, if you're getting started and you had to pick one, I think most people will probably guess what that one is, but I'll say it out loud. It's a great one to start with. It's LinkedIn, right? This is where your job opportunities are going to come from. Every single job I've had in the ecosystem has originated directly, and I can point to, in some cases, the exact post or the exact piece of my profile have come from LinkedIn for me. And that may not always be true for everybody out there, but I will say if you work the system, then LinkedIn will absolutely produce results for you. And then once you've established your brand on LinkedIn, you can move on to other channels, right? So personally today, I use LinkedIn, I use Twitter, I use Slack, Discord, YouTube, and then virtual events like this. And so, if, I guess let's do a quick status check, right? So Antonella, with your question, what is a brand? How do you create it? So far we've talked about, what a brand is, right? What the act of branding means. How do you create this branding statement? We talked about that. We know we have to create a branding strategy, which is centered around this branding statement. And we know we need to leverage one of our marketing channels to launch our branding strategy, right? But again, what does that actually look like? So what I'll do is I'll provide some an example, which kind of will serve as a way you can get started with launching your brand. So if I take you back to to 2018 timeframe, when I decided to make Salesforce my second career after the military, I knew that I would have to develop a personal brand that compensated for a complete lack of technical experience. I had never heard of Salesforce before. I certainly didn't have any badges. I had no knowledge of it. And not only that, I had no Salesforce professionals whatsoever in my network. In fact, I deleted my LinkedIn network and I started over. And so after conducting this personal inventory of my skills and attributes that I mentioned earlier, I decided to focus on my transitional journey from service member to Salesforce professional. And this was my initial branding statement, right before the current one. And I was going to highlight the one, what I call a meta ability that has enabled me to succeed in every environment. And that was when, was and is my work ethic, right? So I always tell people there's always going to be smarter people in the room with me, but there's never going to be anyone in the room with me that works harder than me. That's something I can directly control. And for that matter, so can you. But then again, it's not enough to simply say, oh, you know what, I possess these valuable qualities. I'm a hard worker, right? Everybody says that. No one's going to list laziness in the soft skills section of their resume. I actually had to prove that I was a hard worker. And so to accomplish this, I brought my personal life or my personal brand to life, and I communicated my work ethic and my passion for the Salesforce platform by earning, Trailblazer or Trailhead badges as quickly as I could and broadcasting my achievements on social media. And so, this act of earning Ranger over and over again every few months and sharing it with the Trailblazer community on social media, for me, was an effective method for getting the attention of potential employers. And, funny story, I talked about before we began rolling how, or I guess that was after we began recording, how I got the idea for my professional brand from a Boston Salesforce Saturday meeting. I was sitting, we were at, I forget where we were at. It was some like coffee / salad place in
It was
Boston.
Panera. It was
That's what it
Panera
was.
in Back Bay.
Panera Bread. Yep. So we were sitting there, and the topic of Jennifer Lee came up, who's also a Boston Salesforce Saturday community member. And if you haven't heard of her, she now works at Salesforce. You can link with her on LinkedIn and especially Twitter, where she's most active. But at the time, and I believe it's still true today, she had every single badge, which was mind-boggling. And it was one component. She's got many of her personal brand that was effective in getting her name out that people knew her for. So I was like, okay, well, if Jennifer can do that, I can probably do that too. And so I did. And I still use this strategy today, right? And it still works. So if you looked at my posts from earlier this week, I earned my 1900th badge. And I posted about it on LinkedIn, and that post has, it's right now it's something over 18,000 views, which is decent coverage. And so, I'll finish up with this, right? If you're asking yourself, okay, Dave, great, awesome, lots of views on social media, that's great, but how does that land me a job? I've asked myself that, and I was asking myself that in the initial stages of my branding strategy. And so, the number of views and reactions you get to a post in and of themselves don't necessarily mean much, right? But they are a direct measure of that post's engagement and exposure level within your network. And so statistically, over time, right, if you've taken the time to build a targeted network, and what I mean by targeted network is, it's folks that are relevant to your profession, right? So if you're a Salesforce professional, it is Salesforce admins, developers, consultants, recruiters, hiring managers, so on and so forth. It's not like, people in, I don't know, the architectural or the engineering industry. It's focused in on your industry. So if you've built that targeted network, right, there's going to be a high likelihood that in those views and reactions, there's recruiters and hiring managers who may be looking for Salesforce talent. And so over time, if they continually see you posting quality content, your professional reputation is going to grow, and you're going to begin to be seen as a thought leader in the industry. And that will eventually translate to being invited to interview for open positions that align with your expertise. And that's exactly what happened to me. So.
That is so powerful. Before we move on to the next question, I wanted to ask you, how much pressure does this have on you? Meaning the fact that you always need to be on, the fact that you always need to prove yourself to yourself and to others, and the fact that now you have such a broad community that you are their inspiration. So how much of this does it impact you in terms of how much time you have to allocate and invest to it?
Yeah, so that's a great question. You have to be careful what you wish for, right? Because in the beginning, I was like, gosh, it would be great to be noticed in this ecosystem, which is huge. How do I do that? And over time, right, you build your brand. And if your brand is successful, you build a network, a following. And then it becomes less of how do I get noticed? And it becomes more a question of how do I manage my time now that I have been noticed? And to your point, Antonella, I have folks that look forward to the weekly sessions that I do. If there's ever a time where I can't do that session because I'm sick or whatnot, I worry about that because I don't want to let down the folks that are relying upon that content to help inform their path in the ecosystem. So, the way that I've approached that is it's been an evolution. So we'll get into, and we'll talk about kind of the evolution of a brand. Initially, some of the activities that I engaged in to promote my brand, once I had transitioned from looking for a job and now I had a job, it became less of, I want to get my name out there so recruiters and hiring managers notice me. And it became more of, I want to get my name out there as a thought leader and as a mentor, because mentorship is really important to me. And so I began kind of ad hoc mentoring, right? Answering questions on LinkedIn, doing a bit of question answering in the Trailblazer community, having one-off conversations. Over time, I got more busy, and I had less time to do those one-off conversations. And so I was like, okay, I have to evolve my branding activities. How do I do that? So if you haven't heard of Veterati, and if you're not involved with the military, chances are you may not have. It is an online free platform where anybody can sign up as a mentor. You don't have to be military to be a mentor. And then the mentees are actually service members, transitioning service members, veterans, and spouses. And so if you're a non-military member and you want to mentor, in any industry, you can sign up and you can then have one-to-one focused conversations with these military community members to help them. And so I would encourage anyone that wants to mentor to sign up as a mentor, anyone that wants to mentee that is in the military community to sign up to be paired with those mentors. What that does is it provides a structure, and it provided a structure for my mentorship activities, because now it was on a calendar, right? It was these scheduled sessions, and I had a framework. It's a robust platform. You get automatic phone calls to connect with your mentee, and so it's great. And so I did that for about a year. And at the end of that year, I'd gotten hired by Salesforce at that point, and I was in a service delivery role. So I was 65-hour weeks, and it was crazy. And I was like, wow, this past year where I've mentored like 65 different people, and I spent about 250 hours doing it, was fantastic. But I was at the point where I was almost burnt out and was like, I need to do something different. And obviously I didn't want to quit because I love the community. So I was like, okay, I got to change what I'm doing. How do I reach more people in my branding activities, but spend less time doing it? How do I broaden that impact? Because ultimately work-life balance is important. And so that's when I launched what I'm doing now, which is it's this forum which serves as a collaborative mentorship forum where numerous people can all join at the same time, once a week, these Wednesday evenings. And what I do is, because I'm honestly not that interesting, like I can't keep up a conversation about, the stuff that I've done every week after week. That would get old really quick. So I knew that at the outset. I was like, okay, well, what I'll do is I'll invite different Salesforce professionals to the conversation, and they will chat about their experiences. And in doing so, we can explore different career paths, and that will help inform people that are coming into the ecosystem that don't know which path to choose. And so I've had 48 sessions of doing that, and it hasn't gotten stale because every single week it's a different, interesting person. So that's kind of how I was able to keep doing what I wanted to do, which was helping people and mentoring, but yet preserve that work-life balance in the midst of an incredibly busy career. And, that's getting ready to change again, right? Because I'm at the point where, again, like it's grown so much. I now have 50 to 60 folks at every session. I have this cadence where I have to find somebody new. I have to write down questions to ask them. I have to, create with the help of my volunteers, we create marketing materials, and we push out the marketing messages. So at this point, it's not me anymore. I do have some help, but it's a lot of work. So I'm going to evolve that moving forward into the summer and reimagine it once again. So a long way, Antonella, of saying you constantly have to evolve your branding activities, because once you get good at branding, it can take over your life if you let it, but it doesn't have to. And you can still be successful. You can still help people as long as you reimagine how you're doing that.
I love that. And I love the analogy with your values, because I still see that your values, you have preserved all of that, while in the meantime, you have flexed your style of branding to really preserve as much as you could have, that really defines you. So love your attitude and love the spirit of still helping people throughout the process of also evolving yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dave.
Yeah. And 3 takeaways so far, like knowing your value, that this is a journey that evolves over time and adapts. And, I also hear that there's a lot of empowerment here. You were talking about kind of flipping the script in terms of having your brand out there so much that people gravitate towards you, and that you're out there helping others. I think that's really wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I wanted to jump to a question on here about, is branding consistent across domains of engagement? How does it adapt to different circumstances? And it also ties into the question on here about, are there different types of branding?
Yeah, so let me cover the types of branding first, and then I'll get into the domains, because both questions are spot on. And I'm glad you asked them, because I hadn't actually thought about it before. And when I sat down earlier this week and I put some pen to paper, so to speak, it's really Google Docs, but I realized, there really are different types of branding, and you're going to express your brand differently in those different domains. So ultimately, there's numerous different factors you need to take into account when crafting your brand to ensure that you're delivering the right messages to the right audience on the right channel at the right time. And so the way that I look at it is, your brand is made up of several different components. There's the professional component, there's the personal and social component, and then there's this unique face-to-face component. And so to effectively communicate these components to your target audience, and again, your target audience is going to shift depending on what you want to do. And we'll talk about that too. Your branding strategy needs to consider the appropriate marketing channel for each one and the type of content that you share on each channel. So when looking at the professional component, right, you as a professional, an example channel and arguably the best one is LinkedIn. The type of content that you're going to share on here needs to be professional. This is my opinion, but don't make the mistake, which a lot of folks do, of treating it like Facebook and creating personal posts. There's appropriate channels for that, and we'll talk about that next. Now, having said that, you may be saying to yourself, well, Dave, I see personal messages all the time on LinkedIn and they work. True. Yeah. I mean, there are exceptions to the rule. There are people that post occasional personal messages and they really resonate because they give you that insight into that person's personal side. But there's also people that only post personal stuff, but they found a way to make it work so it doesn't come off as irrelevant. And so I'll give you an example. Like if you've ever connected with someone or followed them who posts like all this motivational content, I love that stuff, right? It is not necessarily professional. It's little snippets and stories that come into your feed in the morning, like when you're waking up and you may be grumpy and it's like, this person did this and you're like, oh, that's awesome. And it charges you for the day. So even though it's personal and may not be professional, like I'm one of the people that signs up for that stuff because I love it. But if we're breaking it down, fundamentally, I would say, unless you have a really good way of doing that, don't start there, right? Keep it simple, keep LinkedIn professional. And then as you learn how to promote your brand, then you can kind of mix that personal and professional across the channels, but it's a skill set. And so if you move to the personal social component, those channels are going to be things like Twitter, Facebook. Personally, I don't use Facebook. Some folks do. I use Twitter, which I consider to be kind of the social language of Salesforce. Because if you look at Salesforce professionals, 9 times out of 10, they're going to have a Twitter profile. And this is where you can let your personal side show, right? It adds that additional depth to your brand because you don't want to just be seen as this professional person that all you talk about is business, right? You want to have the fun side, the kitschy side where you share what your family life, your foods, your interests, your hobbies, all that kind of stuff. And that's Twitter. And then the face-to-face component. So we already talked about some of those channels like, trade shows, Salesforce Saturday, user groups like this, community events. If you can do it in person physically, that's the best, right? But obviously in this COVID era, that's not always possible. So virtual can work if you're unable to meet for logistical or safety reasons. But this face-to-face component, right, it adds that final dimension to your brand. So this is where people can get a better sense of your personality, your character. It's live, right? It's not this stilted LinkedIn, post a message, read the message, you're actually communicating back and forth in real time where people can see your face, they can read your tone, your facial expressions, your body language, and you can present your authentic self during these moments. And so each one of these, these opportunities is an opportunity to network and to share and extend the reach of your brand. Right now, I am sharing and extending the reach of my brand, not only with, the 20 or so folks that are on the call, but, this is going to be recorded. It is recorded and will be shared on YouTube. And that's expanding my reach beyond that. And so these face-to-face, the face-to-face component of your brand is where the highest level of social bonding occurs to really cement your brand. So I'll kind of move on now. We talked about, how branding will change based upon the different phases of your career. And I talked about how that changed for me, right? So initially it was, hey, I want to get hired. Then it became, I want to be a mentor. And then it became, I want to scale my mentorship. But, at a basic level, if you're looking for your first role, right? How should your branding strategy, your content strategy, how should that be matched to that phase of your professional journey? Well, you're going to focus on probably casting a wider net, right, within your chosen industry, because you're trying to capture more leads. You want more recruiters and more hiring managers to see your content. So it's that wide net, right? And when I say, net, it's like, who are you at mentioning? What hashtags are you using? Who are you pulling into your network? That's how you widen that net. You're going to have a higher frequency of posts to establish and grow your brand. And then you're going to create that level of content that aligns with your experience level. So if you're brand new and you may be asking yourself, if I don't know how to create content and I've never done it before and I'm brand new, I don't know anything about this industry, how do I get started, right? Ask questions. It's the simplest way to create content. any question you're thinking right now, or we talk about later, you can post in the LinkedIn post. In the Salesforce industry, people love to answer questions, and it will get some attention, guaranteed, right? You can also share your achievements. That's huge. So some folks talked about the fact that they were getting ready to prepare for an exam or getting ready to make Ranger. Share that. Absolutely share that. And again, I have found that when I share an achievement, it gets, among all my other posts, right? Here's a little secret. When you share your achievement, it gets the highest rating, the highest likes, reactions, personal messages, comments, the whole 9 yards. Which I understand, and I don't. I understand because it's an incredibly supportive community, and we love to celebrate each other's accomplishments. But sometimes I'll share things that I think will really resonate, and they won't, right? So we'll talk about how do you iterate later. But I'll give you an example. When I reached 11-time Ranger, that was my highest all-time, biggest, widest post. I had 196,000 people view the post. And if you were listening earlier, you heard me say that I just reached 1,900 badges, and I only had 18,000 people, right? So it's not this linear thing. You always have to be tweaking it. I didn't get anywhere near the number of posts I had back at 11-time Ranger as I did this week with 19-time Ranger. And we could talk about why that is, and I have my suspicions. But the point is, always be evolving your content throughout your career, because it's going to change. What hits today will not hit tomorrow. Not only will you change, but the industry will change, people's interests will change. So that's kind of when you're first starting out. Now, as you move on and you're in this full-time employed role, maybe it's your first role, maybe it's your fifth role, whatever it is, right? Things are going to change. Your strategy should change. So your content strategy is likely going to have matured, and now you're generating original content that seeks to inform rather than ask questions. And usually it's aligned with your area of expertise. So maybe you're posting about a project you were on or something you learned about, from the latest release, and here's how you implemented it, whatever it happens to be. You are likely going to have a lower frequency of posts, right? Because your brand's already established, and you don't need to necessarily, you always want to be growing it, right? But at this point, you're mostly maintaining it. You don't have the huge peaks that you saw in the beginning when you were trying to build it. You're no longer building it, you're growing it. And so at this point, you may also have expanded to other marketing channels, and that's going to influence, your messages and how you send them, which we'll get to when we talk about domains of engagement. And so, then you move on, right? You've been in the ecosystem for a while. Maybe you're looking to advance, or you're looking to jump into a different role. Again, your strategy should shift. You're going to cast probably a narrower net, target at a specific role or company, right? Because you want to attract the attention of that particular hiring manager for that role, or that company for that specific, range of roles. And so now your posts are probably going to jump a bit, right? Because you want to capture the attention of your target audience, and you're trying to kind of branch out and present yourself maybe as a leader now, or as this functional expert in this different area. And so your content is going to be laser focused on demonstrating that you have the experience and expertise necessary to perform well, either in that more senior role or that different role. All right, so take a look at it and think about it. Your branding is going to take a lot of practice and a lot of iteration. If you look at it from a process perspective, because I'm a process guy, it's a simple process. Step 1, release content. Step 2, review your metrics. How many views, reactions, comments, direct messages, reshares. Step 3, adjust your content strategy accordingly. Step 4, release new content. Step 5, rinse and repeat. And so because I released that post earlier this week that had decent coverage, but not as much as before, I'm going to go back and think about why that was, and maybe evolve my approach for how I release the next post, that is similar to that post. And so, you asked a 2-part question, Daniel. It was, are there different types of branding, and is branding consistent across domains of engagement, or does it adapt? And so I will say, your branding strategy should absolutely consider the different domains of engagement, which is to say your message is going to change depending on, where you're communicating it. And we talked a little bit about that, and I'll just go over it briefly again. So across the domains of social media engagement, right, the essential elements of a brand are pretty much just the same. The foundation is pretty much the same. Regardless of the marketing channel, you need to have a complete and current profile. Doesn't matter if that's LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook,
Got to have it, right? You need to have a robust and relevant network. Okay, it doesn't matter the marketing channel. You have to have people in your network if they're going to see what you share. And then the third thing, you have to generate consistently content that has high quality. And if people are like, well, I've already got a profile, I've already got a robust network, I should be good, right? No, absolutely not. This is where people make a mistake. They go, I've created a LinkedIn profile and I put my picture up, my resume, and I've connected with tons of people. Why aren't the jobs coming in? Well, think about it. Like, I have something like, I don't know, almost 14,000 people in my network. And do I know all of them? No, I absolutely not, right? But having said that, I will continue to grow that network, right? Until it maxes out. The thing is that I only know the people that consistently post, and that's maybe a few hundred people, right? So if you connect with me today, and I have to go back and I got to go back to my LinkedIn profile and connect with folks, I will do that. But if you connect with me today and you don't post anything, chances are in a month, I won't remember that connection, right? Because there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of other connections, unless you post. If you're consistently popping into my feed, I'm going to take notice and I'm going to engage with your posts. I'm going to like them. I'm going to comment them. And if you're really posting good stuff, I'm going to click that little bell icon on your profile so that I'm notified whenever you post again. And then I'm going to start sharing those posts with my network at my office hours, in my LinkedIn feed, right? So something to consider. Now, even though those three requirements don't change across marketing channels, profile, network, content, you absolutely need to adapt your strategy to suit them. Okay, and we just talked about why you can't post the same content on Facebook or Twitter as you would on LinkedIn, right? The reason is your credibility could suffer if you're using a professional social media site to repeatedly post personal content, because people aren't coming to that site for the most part to see personal stuff. If they want to see personal stuff, they're going to go to Twitter or Facebook. So I like to use analogies. Think of it in this terms. You wouldn't show up to a career fair in Bermuda shorts and a tank top, right? Your attire would suit the nature of the occasion. And so the same concept applies to the tone and content of your messaging when posting on social media. And so if you're still listening to me and you're like, okay, great, but how do I actually create this brand? How do I launch it? Like, just, relax. You don't have to invent your brand. You don't have to invent your branding strategy, and you don't have to invent your content strategy in a vacuum, right? There are plenty of people out there that you can emulate until you develop your own distinctive style. And to that point, none of the groundwork that my brand is built upon is original at all, right? I didn't invent this stuff. I borrowed all the concepts from other people, and that's totally okay to do so. It's not plagiarism, right? As long as you give credit where credit is due, and then you build upon that, right? So I'm not going to exactly copy someone else's brand, but I'll absolutely use the elements of their branding strategy and content strategy, the building blocks, to create my own, right? So to put this in another example, when looking at my branding statement, I'm certainly not the only veteran with a strong work ethic who's passionate about the platform and loves to give back. There's tons of folks out there with the exact same, overall branding statement as me. And truth be told, I did not create Military Trailblazer office hours. I didn't. It was along well before I came along. It was created by Bill Cooler. And if you don't know who Bill Cooler is, he's a Salesforce MVP. He is the co-founder of Resource Hero, which is an app exchange company. Phenomenal, brilliant guy. He started office hours. I simply approached him one day and said, hey, Bill, you do mostly technical stuff, which I'm okay at, but that's where you shine. I don't want to do that. What about if I borrowed your brand and I built on it and I did the professional branding, career branding type stuff? And he was very gracious. Not only did he say, yes, you can leverage my brand and we can share it together, but he gave me access to his Pardot instance and he helped me build the framework, which I launched office hours, right? Huge mentor of mine, huge support. So having said that, I'll just kind of summarize with this, take the groundwork from others, build on top of that until you develop your own distinctive style that maps to your individual goals.
So well said. And, some of the themes I heard there, there's about being authentic to yourself. There's about adapting and, being appropriate to different contexts and situations. And then there's like evolving. And, if you're not sure exactly where to begin, then look at what's out there and take elements of what you're seeing for branding and try it on and see what sort of fits your style and keep improving upon that. Well, we wanted to make sure that we moved to some of the content that you have too. And then we can come back to other questions towards the end.
So this is my journey, and this is what I started using when I began to engage in community events and speaking engagements, things of that nature, that really quickly summed up who I am and what I'm about. A picture, speaks 1,000 words. And so, if you are creating, if you're writing a resume, or if you are creating, let's say on the Salesforce platform, your professional portfolio, which you can do through the Trailhead module, where it sets you up with an Experience Cloud site, and you build this live portfolio. And if you have questions about where that's at, how to do it, we could talk to that. But if you're building one of those, this is a great example of what you can put on that, or this is a great example of what you can send to a recruiter who just wants to get a feel for who you are, or you could post it on in the featured section of your LinkedIn, right? So when they scan your page, this pops up and they go, oh, cool, because it's gonna appear in their view, and it kind of pops, and it's an interest area. So they may click on it and go, oh, cool, this is a really neat slide. This kind of talks about their journey, and then maybe they look at some other parts of your profile, and then maybe they initiate a conversation. So this was my journey and kind of the progression of it as I got to where I am today. And it's been really successful in communicating very succinctly what I'm about, such that I have folks at work that'll say, hey, Dave, as part of this customer meeting, can you share your story, your slide? Because what I do is I'm a solution engineer, and I'm in the DoD, or Department of Defense vertical. And so a lot of the folks that I talk to are military, and they may be getting out. And so this is interesting to them to how can they, blaze their trail in the ecosystem as a military person soon to retire or soon to separate. But anybody can create this, and I found it really helpful. If you want to skip ahead 2 slides. So that's basically just a quick branding statement. We already covered that. It's not my branding statement. It's just a dictionary one. And so this is kind of where I talk about how do you set up your LinkedIn profile. And it's got an old profile of mine. I need to update it, but it's still demonstrative of some things to do and not to do. So this is an actual person's real profile. I changed the name to preserve the innocent. But this is sadly their actual profile. There was no background picture, right? No profile picture, and you can see how it's what they've written about. So if you kind of advance the slide a click, you'll see this is an older version of mine. And then if you click again, right? So first of all, starting from the top down, have a professional photo. If you're building your LinkedIn profile, take the time to either go to a community event where they sometimes take them. Have your significant other, take a really high quality one, maybe, behind the background or with a high resolution camera, pay the money to go and have a professional photo taken, whatever it is. A lot of folks will do like a selfie, which is pretty obvious. It's a selfie, or they'll crop somebody else out, right? Or they'll be in their like tuxedo from their wedding, which, congratulations, but it's kind of cheesy when you put it in because we can all tell it's the wedding photo. It's not your professional photo. So invest the time in having a quality photo. The other thing is, the background photo. Don't use the stock LinkedIn one, which is cool. It's a little web of interconnections, but everyone's got that. Find again, to my earlier point, your branding statement should be a synopsis of your value and your values. Find an image that really communicates that. For me at this time, that's a trail, right? Trailblazer, and I was blazing my trail. It's a train track. So that was my path I was going down, and all my certifications are on there. So that was meaningful to me. I've got a different one today, which if you go to my LinkedIn profile, it's me on stage at company kickoff with Mark Benioff, and I'm getting awarded my Trailhead or Trailblazer hoodie, the golden hoodie. Whatever it happens to be for you, whatever resonates and is professional, put that back there, right? That help communicate the flavor of the person that is you. So if you advance the slide one more time, that's what we're talking about here, a banner photo. And then your headline, right? So your headline is incredibly important. This person, they're a consultant and that's where they live. Great. Mine at the time, I had put in the things that I found were most impactful. So my roles in there, how many times I'd reached Ranger, how many certifications I had, and the fact that I was a veteran. And so I'll tell a quick story. If you're ever wondering, okay, who cares about your profile header? Like, why does it matter? That's the first thing a recruiter sees, aside from your picture, right? They're going to go to your picture first and go, what does this person look like? It's just human nature, makes it important, right? If there's no picture, they're going to lose interest. So they go to your picture, they go, okay, that's what the person looks like. Then they're going to look to your headline. And that may be all they look at, right? So they're busy people. They're doing a 4 to 6 second scan of your LinkedIn profile based upon the searches that hit on their search. And if it's not captivating their attention, they're going to move on. Now, if there's things in your headline that are interesting, they may stick around a while. And that's what happened to me. So when I first got into the ecosystem in July 1st of 2019, prior to that, really, I was applying for jobs at Salesforce. And they didn't even reach back out to say I wasn't accepted. It was crickets, nothing. And so rather than get discouraged, I was like, okay, cool. It's not going to happen for me right now. I will put that Salesforce dream on the shelf because that was my dream job, and I'll come back to it. And so fast forward in time, I've got this profile. I've been working at PoleSource, which is a platinum consulting firm. They just got bought by EPAM, great company. And I was a junior consultant, and Salesforce came to me. And a recruiter reached out and said, hey, Dave, we've got this open solution architect role. Do you want to interview? And it blew my mind, right? And, so one of the things I talk about, and we haven't talked about it yet, but like one of the questions on your slide is, how have you seen personal branding pay off for you? And one of the ways that I've seen it pay off is kind of indicative of this story. And the reason why I knew that it was my headline that resulted in that initial interview is because I asked. I said, hey, recruiter person, this was after I'd gotten hired. What made you stop on my profile? I've been trying to get into Salesforce literally for over a year, but you looked me up instead of me applying for a role. She's like, well, it's very simple. I looked at your picture, and then I dropped to your headline, and it had some neat stuff in it. It was impressive. It had a lot of great accomplishments. And so that's when I dug deeper into your profile, thought you'd be a good fit. And I asked you for, if you wanted to interview. So it's incredibly important that you put thought into the profile that you craft, and especially that headline, because it could literally be the difference between getting a job and not getting a job. And so as we move down, we're talking about the about section. And you can't see mine right now, but you can take a look at it if you go to my profile. It's pretty much the same. And it's you click, if you go to my LinkedIn profile and you click on see more, it's this very long list, but I've broken it up into sections. So I would encourage you, if you're putting effort into your about section, and you should, because if they stick around, if that recruiter sticks around, that's where they're going to go next. It's the next thing down. And I listed my training, so my badge count, my certifications, all the positions I'd held, my volunteer work, all the social media sites that I was on. So your trailblazer.me profile, LinkedIn, Twitter. If you've got a professional portfolio that you've built on the Salesforce platform, have that in there. Mine's in there. And the mistake that some people make is, one, this John Doe person had a couple sentences, and the mistake that other people make is they have a ton of stuff. And it's just this mash of words that you can't really even digest. No one wants to read a paragraph like this big of just words. So mine is very succinct. It's in outline form, and it's broken up. So if you click on it, you can get a really quick sense of who I am. And then you move down the page to the featured section. And so you don't even see the featured section on John Doe's page. He doesn't spend the time to go there, which is a mistake. Right? The featured section is where, like the slide I showed previously of my journey, that's where you can put that slide so it pops, and they look at your picture, your headline, they go, oh, cool, what's that? And they look deeper. And so if you can see right there, that big yellow circle, that's the badge for the Trailhead Trail to build your own professional profile. So if you're interested in that, it's still on my LinkedIn, profile. It's a few pages back in my featured section, so you have to scroll a bit. Other stuff has moved to the front. And that's another reminder to always be evolving your content, right? Just because you have a LinkedIn profile doesn't mean you should stop there. You're like, all right, I'm done. I update mine on a daily, sometimes weekly, sometimes daily basis, because things change, right? What works today may not work tomorrow, and you've done new things, right? You make Ranger, holy cow, update your profile, right? Post that, and then your educational section is important. And if you scroll back up real quick to the previous slide, sorry, I'm jumping around. If you go 2 back, there you go. You'll see that it's Trailhead by Salesforce. So, some people, like initially I had my college in there, and it was Villanova because I'd gotten a master's certificate there in Lean Six Sigma. But I was like, you know what, really, that's great if I was going to go for a project management role, but that's no longer my interest. My interest now is Salesforce. So I need to fully invest in this industry. So now my education listed is Trailhead by Salesforce. So I would just encourage you to think about that. So that's kind of a full profile. And again, I didn't create any of these concepts. How did I create my profile? I went to those folks that were already in the industry, that were already successful, those thought leaders like Jennifer Lee, who we talked about earlier, David Giller, David Liu, folks on this call like Antonella. And I looked at what they had and I was like, okay, well, obviously I didn't plagiarize their content, right? But I did borrow the concepts that they had. I did fill out my featured section. I did borrow some concepts for my headline, for the background image, right? And you can do the same. So go to my profile, do a search in LinkedIn for Salesforce MVP. Those people are by nature successful because they've reached the MVP status, and borrow from their concepts. So if you go down to the next slide, I'll touch briefly on, okay, so we've talked about like earlier in the discussion, and I do want to wrap up here because I want to leave at least 10 minutes for chat, and I can hang out after too, after the 11 o'clock if folks want to. But there's really 4 main categories, which we touched on briefly, of content generation. So if you've never created content, I talk fast, but let me stop here, for emphasis. Don't be afraid, right? It can be terrifying to post something on social media and then wait for the whole world to weigh in. Again, you chose the right industry. People in the Salesforce ecosystem are generally nice people, right? They're not going to attack you, but you do have to be brave, and you do have to post, and you do have to post consistently if you want this whole thing to work. If you don't post, I'll go so far as to say your brand's not going to be as successful, right? Because again, if you're not popping in people's feed, they're going to forget about you. So what do you post? Questions, accomplishments, reshared. What that means is that's content that's not original, that you've pulled from other sources. So maybe Antonella posts something and I go, that's really cool, and I reshare that. Credit who you're sharing the content from. They should deserve credit. They deserve credit too, right? But reshare that, and that's a very quick and easy post that you don't really have to think about because you're just resharing, and you're thanking them for the content. Really quick thank you message, and it will generate some interactions for your brand and help you build that. Other things you can do to reshare content is go look at the release notes, or go listen to a podcast, and then type up a really quick summary of the things that were meaningful to you. And they weren't your thoughts, right? Someone else said them, so be sure you credit them. But just hey, Antonella, was at Salesforce Saturday, and she said these 3 things during the session. It was really impactful, so cool. And here's a link to that recording. And then boom, not only have you promoted Antonella, so she's going to be happy with you, and she's maybe going to help promote you, but you've also promoted yourself through resharing her content. And then you get to the point where you're generating your own content, right? So if you click next, and hopefully the resolution is good enough here. These are some very early posts that I created that fall into each one of those buckets. So here's the question. Here's when I was brand new. You can tell it's 2 years ago, and I've only been in the industry for a little over 3 years. So I'm asking a question about how do I study for this platform app builder certification? That's and actually it's older than 2 years, because this presentation is about a year old. So this was like 3 years ago. So I was brand new. And I simply asked her question, help me out here. How do I study? Right. And so at the time, you can see there's 40 reactions, there's 39 comments, and it got more than that. So 39 people took the time to weigh in, and ultimately I passed the exam thanks to their help. So it helped me professionally, but it got my brand out there. And I mean, so what is it, like 3 sentences? It's probably, maybe 3 or 4 after that. Very short, easy to do, not hard to think about. And people on this call mentioned they were studying for the admin exam. Put out a post on Monday that says, hey, I'm studying for the admin exam. What are your top 5 tips? guarantee you it's going to hit. You're going to get some exposure and you're going to get some knowledge. So if you go to the next one, this is where I share an achievement, right? So, and this is that post I was referencing earlier where I hit 11-time Ranger. And at the time it had, what was it? I'm looking at the slide, 194,000 views, almost 1,000 reactions. This one did really well, again, because people love celebrating your accomplishments. And so when you make Ranger, when you get a super badge, when you pass your admin exam, post about that. Always include a picture because I think statistically it's like it gets 11 times more views if you have a picture in there. Use some emojis. I always use emojis because it captures that attention really quickly. Make it succinct to the point. Include @mentions, right? @mention Salesforce, @mention Salesforce admins, @mention Trailhead, @mention Trailhead by Salesforce. You'll see the whole list when you go through. Hashtag the same, right? Because that increases your exposure and your searchability. If you go to the next one, this falls into the bin of resharing, right? So I didn't create certification days, and over time, like I would also share other people that have posted about this. But you can see, like, I think it's got 85 reactions, 7 comments, and 5,600 views, which is decent, right? 5,000 views is you're doing all right. And I didn't create any of that. I'm just putting it out there. So it's effective and it's easy. And that's at the crawl stage when you're like, I don't know what to post. Well, post stuff that you didn't create and credit your source. And if you go to the next one, and here's that original content. All right, so I did borrow Salesforce's template. That's not mine. But here's, I think I shared, so I shared my goals for the next year. And this one had 15,000 views. So again, a decent number of views because people love sharing accomplishments. And I had posted about what I'd accomplished last year, what I was getting ready to do, and they love goal setting in this ecosystem. So that got really great results. So that's just a really quick crash course in how do you create content and what does it look like.
This was awesome, Dave. Love your strategy, your attitude of work, and the willingness to help others and share your strategy. It's important to have a thought process in place. And thank you for sharing that. It's going to be great to see other people apply that.